Affirmative action is dead in college admissions, making race-based decisions at universities a thing of the past. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Shaun Harper, a provost professor at the University of Southern California, where he heads up the Race and Equity Center. Thank you so much for joining me today, Shaun.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I read in a piece you wrote, you had some predictions in response to the affirmative action ruling. Could you just briefly run through some of those?
Sure, but let me first say that I would love to be wrong about each of these predictions. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I would love to be wrong. The first is that we're going to see a dramatic decline in the enrollment of Black students at highly selective public and private institutions. To be sure, all students of color, including Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander students, will be negatively impacted by the SCOTUS ruling. All students of color. But the ruling is going to have the most devastating impact on Black students. Why would I say this? Well, because there were 10 states that banned affirmative action years ahead of the affirmative action ruling. My state, California, is one of them through a 1996 ballot measure, Prop 209. Uh, Conscious admissions practices were struck down, throughout the University of California system and all of the other public higher ed systems and institutions here in California. What we saw exactly a decade after the elimination of race based admissions at the University of California, Los Angeles, there were 96 Black first year students in an incoming class of more than 4,700 new students. 96. And I'd be remiss if I did not note that a sizable portion of those 96 students were student athletes. We've seen a similar kind of trend in the decline of Black students in other states across the country where affirmative action bans have been enacted. That's just one of the many predictions that I offered in the article.
So, what could colleges and universities do? I mean, we've seen affirmative action and now it's dead. There had to be some pros and some cons within it. What did we learn from it?
Well, what we learned was that many institutions were indeed relying on affirmative action as a bit of a crutch, if we're being honest. They were not really experimenting with and exploring and ultimately enacting an expansive range of methods to recruit racially and ethnically diverse students. So I think that one of the benefits at this point, now that we're in this post affirmative action era, is that it's requiring colleges and universities to actually start thinking much more complexly, much more creatively, much more expansively about what they can do that falls within the legal parameters that the Supreme Court has set. But just a new set of approaches to recruiting students of color. Let me just say quickly that as I travel the country, giving speeches and presentations and things at universities, I often will spend time with Black undergraduate students, given my research. Ahead of my talk or right after, I'd be in a circle with dozens, sometimes even hundreds of Black students. But I'll have them go around and introduce themselves. One of the things that became so clear to me, like, I don't know, like 15 years ago, that on campus after campus, almost all of those Black students were from like the same like 5 places. So it really signaled to me that, admissions officers and recruiters were relying on the same supplier high schools and in the same cities to recruit Black students. Look, there are extraordinarily talented Black people everywhere. So I think that now colleges and universities are going to have to be much more deliberate and strategic about finding those Black students and other students of color who are incontestably deserving of admission.
So we've seen like Title IX play out, and now I believe if my facts are right, that there are more women enrolled in colleges than there are men. So Title IX, that wasn't struck down in any way. But I guess I'm asking, how can we get to a point where we see just as many black people, people of color in universities as we do white people?
Yeah, one of the things that we do poorly as a nation, including the nation's colleges and universities, we often fail to learn from legislative wins like Title IX. There are so many things that colleges, universities, government agencies, and corporations have done under the guise of Title IX that are totally scalable, adaptable, and replicable for higher education institutions in a post-affirmative action era. So, in short, what I'm saying is that we really ought to learn from the best of, 50 years of Title IX legislation and, really, again, attempt to scale and adapt and implement those things within the parameters that the Supreme Court has set for affirmative action.
See, with Title IX, I was learning about that in elementary school, middle school. How can we reach down as a country and start looking at the foundation, the education foundation, not just it being, what side of the tracks did you grow up on, and that determines the type of education you receive. That's where it starts. Now, how can we help
That is
with
where,
that?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really important acknowledgement that given the ways that race and socioeconomic status commingle in the United States, it is an irrefutable fact that Black students and Latinx students and Pacific Islander students and Indigenous students are schooled in environments that are structurally inequitable. That is a fact. But one of the things that I want to celebrate, right, I think this is also an important acknowledgement. So I wrote the first piece in which I offered those predictions about the impact of the Supreme Court ruling. It went live on Forbes.com within an hour of the decision being released. Well, a couple days later, I wrote a piece in which I dispelled the myth that these unqualified students of color are being admitted to colleges and universities and that they're being placed at a disadvantage because they can't do the work. The way that I dispelled that myth was with data. Facts matter. Some of those facts: Black students, undergraduates at Harvard and Princeton graduate at rates higher than students overall at Harvard and Princeton. The number at Yale is exactly equal for Black students and students overall. And Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are not the only three institutions where that is the case. I named several others in that second Forbes article, right? The point here is that as we're thinking about structural inequities, it is important to acknowledge that students of color, even those who were schooled in inequitable environments, when they're given the chance at an opportunity for higher education at one of these highly selective institutions, they can and do succeed, sometimes at rates even higher than their white peers and students overall. I think it's just a really important acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. Well, Shaun, what will the impact be on HBCUs? I mean, I've been seeing a lot of arguments and a lot of different comment sections like, well, Black people should just go to, this is from Black people should just go to HBCUs anyway. Like, we should stop trying to reach over in their pot. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I love that you asked me this question, especially as a very proud alumnus of Albany State, a publicly Black university in Georgia. I'm so proud of my HBCU roots. I wrote another piece for Forbes. Look, I've been all over this the past 5 days. So I wrote another piece for Forbes in which I acknowledged that Howard University is among a handful of HBCUs. As a single institution, Howard enrolls more Black students than all 8 Ivy League universities combined. And it's not just Howard; it's also Morgan State and Florida A&M and Tennessee State and a couple other HBCUs that I name in the Forbes piece. The point here, right, is that HBCUs have always done more than their fair share in offering college opportunity to Black students. And they've always done it without discriminating against applicants from other racial groups. We can't say that about the Ivies and other predominantly white institutions, but we can say that about HBCUs. So I am confident that HBCUs are going to continue to overperform in providing college access to very talented Black students.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I made clear in the Howard University article and the article about the other HBCUs is that it's I think it's important to make sure that people don't misunderstand that HBCUs are simply places of rejects, right? Filled with Black students who really low key wanted to go to UCLA or wanted to go to University of Michigan or wanted to go to Dartmouth but got rejected. No, there are lots of very talented Black Americans who deliberately choose HBCUs because
Absolutely.
of
You're speaking to one.
yes, right?
Yes, a
We
proud
yeah,
Howard alum. Proud one.
yeah,
Hmm.
right. So it's not that we were all just rejects and we ended up at these like second choice schools. No, many of us chose HBCUs because they are so identity affirming, culturally inclusive, and so on. So I think that one outcome of the Supreme Court's ban on affirmative action is that I do think that HBCUs are going to get an even larger share of our nation's most brilliant Black students, whom the other institutions, convince themselves that they can't recruit or attract. That's going to be
Hmm.
a win for HBCUs, actually.
So, not just speaking about Black people, but let's talk about our other people of color. Let's talk about like Hispanics. Are they going to feel welcomed at an HBCU?
Yeah, can and do, right? So
Hmm.
this isn't hypothetical. Many HBCUs have been rapidly diversifying over the past decade, certainly over the past 2 decades, right? Um, let's take Howard, for example, your alma mater.
Hmm.
What most
Hmm.
people might misunderstand about Howard, I don't know, folks might be like, well, it's a HBCU, so it must be like 99% Black. No, Howard is 66% Black. Even at 66% Black, they still got more Black students than all the Ivies put together. But the point here, right, is that among that remaining third, there are Latinx students and Asian students and multiracial students and white students, right?
Hmm.
And Howard isn't the only one. Many, many, many HBCUs, including Albany State, where I went, have and have long had Latinx students and have welcomed them with open arms and have created culturally inclusive environments for them.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, Shaun, to legacy admissions. I'm sure you saw a case was brought against Harvard University about their legacy admissions. What's your response?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this incredibly timely question about legacy admissions. I've just written another piece for Forbes on the topic, and it is very much about that lawsuit, which I think is brilliant. The lawsuit makes painstakingly clear that legacy admissions are not colorblind. They are, in fact, very much race conscious, in that most of the children of alumni and those who are children of wealthy donors, over 70% of those applicants are white, right? So it's white students, prospective students, and applicants who are benefiting from this particular boost that they get in the college admissions process at highly selective institutions. So I'm so glad that, you know, since we're racializing things right now, and the Supreme Court has suggested that race conscious admissions can no longer be, well, that also means by extension, in an inescapable fashion, that legacy admissions can no longer be, because they are indeed race conscious practices that overwhelmingly benefit children of wealthy white people.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Shaun.
My pleasure. Anytime.